Hi, I'm Professor Steve and you're watching Real Paleontology. Now, today's video isn't strictly paleo, but it is very relevant. We're going to be talking about hyenas, their bite force, and the myth that surrounds it. You may well have heard this myth repeated in dozens of wildlife documentaries, but it is simply not true. In reality, the hyena does not even come close to being the biggest biter in the world today, and I'm going to explain why. Of course, it's perfectly understandable that people assume that the hyena, particularly the spotted hyena here, has an exceptionally powerful bite. After all, they're demonstrably capable of crushing big bones. And bones are really hard, right? This is absolutely true, but it's not insanely powerful jaw muscles that allow them to do it. So, first I'm going to demonstrate that the hyena does not have crazy powerful jaw muscles, and then I'm going to explain their little secret. Way back in 2004, together with a couple of colleagues, I published this paper, Bite Club. Here we predicted the bite forces of a wide range of mammalian carnivores, cats, dogs, bears, and a bunch of marsupial carnivores too, living and extinct. Up to this point, there had been very little information available on the bite forces of many mammals, or many animals at all. I followed this up a bit later with an even more extensive study, including more species. The reason I think there was so little information available out there on bite force is that getting bite force information from living animals is really hard work. Sticking a bite force transducer into the jaws of a big dog, hyena, or a lion is logistically difficult, unpleasant for the animal, and darn dangerous for the human attempting to do it. There's another problem too. You can never know for sure whether the animal biting down on the transducer is actually biting as hard as it can. So, how do we get our bite force estimates? Let me explain. Here we have the skull of a marsupial lion. The principles are the same with any mammal. Now, the jaw is basically just a simple lever. It's got a fulcrum, here in green, and an out lever, here in red. The out lever takes the load, and then the force is applied by the muscles, of course. And two main muscles do the work. These are the masseter here and the temporalis here. Now, the maximum force that a muscle can develop is directly proportional to its maximal cross-sectional area, basically its maximum thickness. Anyway, with this, you can estimate these muscle forces. Then you can just use very basic physics to predict the maximum bite forces that can be achieved at any point along the jaw or out lever. And it just so happens that it's not hard to estimate these muscle forces. Bottom line is that these two main jaw closing muscles, the temporalis and the masseter, are pretty tightly constrained by the shape of the skull. We can see the maximum area that the temporalis can occupy here, shaded in blue, and the maximum area that the masseter can occupy here. Consequently, we can get good estimates of their maximum cross-sectional areas just by taking a picture and colouring them in. A child, even a professor, could do it. Now, of course, this approach comes up with estimates, and they're not perfect, but the clever guy who developed this method, Geoffrey Thomason, in this paper here, pretty convincingly demonstrated that it came up with estimates that were pretty darn close to reality. So in 2004, myself and my colleague Colin McHenry crunched the numbers and produced the estimates. Then we plotted our bite force estimates for each species against their body weights, as you can see in this figure here. One important thing that we had to consider was something called allometry. Allometry is where you get disproportionate changes in the size or shape of features as animals get bigger or smaller. And when we're talking about bite force, what happens is that as animals get bigger, their bite forces get relatively weaker. For example, if you scaled a pussycat up by a factor of 5, you'd find that although its absolute bite force was much higher, relative to its body weight, its bite force would be much lower. This is basically because the maximum force that its muscles can apply is a function of their maximum cross-sectional area, which is a two-dimensional thing, but their weight is a function of volume, which is a three-dimensional thing. So we corrected for this and produced what we call a bite force quotient. A high bite force quotient means the animal's biting hard for its size, and a low bite force quotient means that they have a weak bite for their size. On this graph here, anything biting above the line is above average, anything below the line is below average. So where is our spotted hyena relative to this line? Well, it falls here, a bit above the line, and its bite force quotient is 117, which is well above average, but it's not truly exceptional. It's about the same as most cats, and indeed well below the jaguar, the hardest biting cat, with a bite force quotient of 137. And it's way below the hardest biting mammal of all time, the marsupial lion here, with a bite force quotient of 194. So, don't get me wrong, the hyena is a hard biter for its size, pretty comparable to most cats, and I would strongly advise that you do not try and kiss a hyena like this fellow here, at least not without introducing yourself first. But the hyena is still a long way from being the hardest biter of all. But this just can't be, I hear you say again. Hyenas crack big bones. Surely they are the biggest biters. How do they do it? Well, here's the trick. It's not magic, it's just plain good engineering. This is a hyena skull. If you look at this tooth here, you can see that it's big, rounded, and bulbous, like the blunt end of a hammer. And that's because it is a hammer. And a hammer is what you want if you want to bust up bones. A knife, no matter how sharp, is just no good for this. A knife is good for cutting meat, but it won't break open bones. And if you try, you'll probably break the knife. So, the hyena has massive hammer-like teeth in both its upper and lower jaws. If you look at this lion skull here, though, although it's way bigger and accommodates way bigger jaw-closing muscles than the hyenas, it doesn't have those huge hammer teeth. In fact, the main cheek teeth here on the lion are long, slicing, knife or scissor-like teeth. I should also add that the hyena skull is also really well adapted to handle these concentrated forces as well, but more on that in a later video. And incidentally, these hammer teeth are not just big, their enamel is really thick and modified to take really high stresses. Altogether, this allows the hyena to concentrate all of its bite force onto a single point between the two bone-cracking teeth without breaking them when it bites into a big bone. And hey presto, the bone is cracked and the hyena can get to the highly nutritious marrow inside it. Now, here we have that lion skull again, and like I said, its jaw-closing muscles are way, way bigger than the hyena's. Its maximum bite force in this individual is about 2.5 times higher than that of the hyena I showed you before. So, what's going on here? Bottom line is, although the lion can't concentrate all that humongous bite force onto a single point on any single bone like the hyena can, it can apply all of that force provided that it spreads it out over a wider area and or if it bites into a tough, fibrous material like muscle or skin that's basically a lot more elastic. Imagine yourself biting into a big piece of rubber that's spread all across your teeth. You could probably apply most, if not all, of your jaw-closing muscle force. But if you stuck a pebble between any two teeth on just one side of your jaw and bit down as hard as you could, you'd almost certainly break your teeth and quite possibly break your jaw. The question I often get asked then is, why does the lion need all that massive bite force if all that it uses it for is to slice through meat and skin? Well, the short answer is that they don't need it to just slice through muscle and skin. They need it to kill relatively big animals. To do this, they will restrain the prey and then usually clamp onto its neck in order to suffocate it. This requires a lot of bite force, and obviously the bigger the prey, the more bite force is needed. You need very, very powerful jaws to suffocate an adult Cape buffalo or even a zebra. But this bite force is being applied to relatively elastic, rubbery material, and it is being distributed over all or most of the teeth in the animal's jaws. So there you have it. The hyena is not the hardest biting mammal. A bunch of other mammals can bite way harder, including the lion, tiger, bears, even the panda bear. But that's another story for another time. However, the hyena does have very cleverly adapted teeth and a well-adapted skull to boot, and no other living mammal on Earth is as well designed to crack big bones. And it does this with great efficiency. So I'm going to give the hyena the last laugh.